You brought up the killer app. The whole theory around that is we know the PC took off because people turned out to need Excel sheets and then could justify it to their companies to buy something really expensive because the PC at that point pays for itself. I'm not sure if Apple has a killer app. Maybe the App Store was the killer app for Apple, right? They didn't expect it. It just worked out. And there's a certain fortuitousness to the idea of the killer app. No one knows what it's going to be until it's there. And it seems like that is what everybody's waiting for in VR at this point too. What is the killer app? And then the second level game is trying to predict what the killer app is going to look like. So I was wondering, are there any games out there that, or even apps that you think have come close or are headed in the right direction?
I think the industry is still, at least for gaming, I don't speak for gaming, I think it's still early for that equivalent, that killer app. But there are some good games out there. Assassin's Creed has a really nice Meta 3 game out that's, I think, really smooth and start to go in that direction. There are a couple of PC VR experiences, but they're much more powerful than the what the Meta can do. They're doing Boneyards, and some other people are doing some pretty interesting, but it just hasn't crossed over to mass, like, oh my God, you gotta get this right now. This is fire, this is the hottest. It's like, folks in the industry are like, wow, that's nice, that's impressive, but we just haven't crossed that threshold. And like you said, anybody who says they can predict what that's gonna be or when it's gonna happen, they haven't gone through a lot of tech transitions before, but it's gonna come. I feel like we're on the cusp of it, and and I'm doing my best to try and figure that out and see what we can do. But yes, it's just not here yet, I think.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about is an inflection point in adoption, right? And what it takes for adoption to kind of skyrocket and make us all millionaires. I think, if you look at the home PC, a lot of there's a lot of factors that can be attributed to its popularity and its rise since the early 80s. But economies of scale is one of those. Processing power, these things that were evolving in parallel, right? And not to sound like Kevin Kelly, but more, when you talk about the App Store and the iPhone or smartphones in general, that was an inflection point of wireless, data, wireless internet, screens having the fidelity, touch screens, and all of these things coming down in cost, and the bootstrapping of those things together that Apple did created a whole new sector, right? And I see that in VR where we're bootstrapping a lot of these technologies together, and the fidelity and the latency has increased since the 60s and 70s, and the cost has come way down. But what is out there right now that's being developed in parallel with HMDs, right? What can be kind of combined and added together? And that's not just a hardware question, it's a software question, right? Like, we kind of talked about it very quickly, but what can AI bring to the table in harboring these experiences? And what can machine learning and what can large data sets, whether they're personal to you or generalized to your type, how can those be leveraged to increase the experience and the immersion and go beyond novelty, right? I don't disparage that this is going towards video games. I mean, I own all the headsets and have for 13, 14 years, which isn't a long time in the history of this technology, but to see it come from the DK1 and how groundbreaking that was to see it, and then 10 minutes later to feel like you were going to fall over, right? And how that's come along to where the experience has changed, even if it's like boot up time and recognizing the room. These types of little changes that change the overall experience to make it positive, to increase adoption. I think that's one thing that we always need to look towards, right?
So I would emphasize or touch again on something that now both Marcus and Daniel have mentioned as a possible motivation or enabler of an inflection point, and that would be AI. It seems to me that just in the last 2 years, the capabilities of the generative image AIs and the large language models has burst on us, indeed on the whole sort of tech community, but even beyond that and to general cultural dialogue in ways that just seem exciting because we can't necessarily predict where they're going at this point. It just isn't apparent where the trajectory is heading. But the possibilities that they present for changing a whole set of affordances in these media, VR, AR, indeed all of the digital media, the possibility for adding to those affordances is so potentially so great that it could be an inflection point for a whole new sets of applications, not just for the coolest games that one can imagine, but for applications that previously didn't seem feasible or that we haven't even thought of yet. So it's simply a guess, but if I had to guess, I would say AI is the wild card that looks really interesting.